at my 8-year-old daughter's birthday party. My mother-in-law leaned close and hissed, "You are just a leech!" 10 minutes later, her golden child collapsed in the middle of the yard. Instantly, the entire family pointed their fingers at me. They expected me to panic, cry, and beg. They had no idea I saw their trap from the very beginning. I simply let them walk right into it. Straight in front of a judge. My name is Morgan Rogers. I am 36 years old, and if you asked anyone sipping champagne on my immaculate lawn this afternoon, they would tell you I am the luckiest woman in North Carolina. They would also tell you I do not deserve any of it. It was my daughter Poppy's 8th birthday. The backyard of our sprawling suburban estate had been transformed into a pastel wonderland, complete with a custom bounce house and a dessert table that cost more than my first car. The guests were a parade of my husband's wealthy relatives and business associates, all wearing designer clothes that screamed their net worth. They mingled under the massive oak trees, their laughter sharp and brittle, ringing like crystal glasses clinking together in a toast to their own superiority. I stood near the edge of the patio, wearing a simple navy sundress. I prefer comfort over labels. I work primarily from home, managing complex data and financial analytics, though my in-laws have always conveniently ignored that fact. To them, my home office is just a hobby room where the little wife pretends to be busy. To them, I am entirely dependent on the magnanimity of Wade Holloway. Wade, my husband, was holding court near the outdoor kitchen. He looked every inch the successful CEO of Holloway Crest Developments, his teeth perfectly white against his faux-tanned skin, his posture wide and commanding. He was playing the role he loved most, the tireless provider, the self-made man who single-handedly kept our household afloat. Every time he glanced my way, his eyes held a familiar, patronizing gleam. He loved to remind everyone, mostly through subtle jokes and backhanded compliments, that he was the king of the castle and I was merely a peasant he had rescued from obscurity. "Morgan! Darling! Really?" The voice sliced through the humid summer air, sharp enough to draw blood. I turned to see my mother-in-law, Lenora Holloway, bearing down on me. She was wrapped in a silk floral ensemble that looked utterly ridiculous for a child's afternoon birthday party. But Lenora never dressed for the occasion. She dressed for the audience. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a textbook display of aristocratic disgust. "Is that what you decided to wear? It looks like something you picked up at a discount rack. And the floral arrangements on the tables are incredibly sparse. I told Wade we should have hired my event planner. This whole setup looks so delightfully amateur." Several of Wade's cousins chuckled softly into their drinks. Lenora thrived on public humiliation. It was her favorite sport. She used it to assert dominance, to remind me that no matter whose name was on the marriage certificate. This was her territory, usually. Her jabs were designed to make me shrink, to make me doubt myself in front of his family. "Mommy!" I tore my gaze away from Lenora's predatory smile as Poppy ran across the grass toward me. She was a vision of pure joy, her dark hair bouncing, her face painted with a sparkly pink butterfly. My heart swelled. Everything I endured in this family, every insult I swallowed, I did to maintain a peaceful environment for her. "Look what Aunt Savannah gave me." Poppy held up a brightly wrapped box with a massive silver bow. I crouched down, meeting her at eye level, completely ignoring Lenora for a moment to create a safe bubble for my daughter. "That looks wonderful. Sweetie, are you having a good time?" "The best time ever!" Poppy beamed, her eyes shining. "Can we cut the cake soon? I want the piece with the biggest frosting flower." "We will cut the cake in exactly 20 minutes, I promised, brushing a stray curl from her sweaty forehead. "Go play with your cousins in the bounce house until then." I watched her run back across the lawn, a protective warmth radiating through my chest. I would never let the Holloway poison touch her. She was my priority, my entire world, and I kept the ugly realities of my marriage firmly shielded from her view. as soon as Poppy was out of earshot. Lenora stepped uncomfortably close. The scent of her expensive, overpowering perfume filled my lungs, making it hard to breathe. Before I could take a step back, her manicured hand shot out. Her fingers wrapped around my bare arm with startling strength, her sharp acrylic nails digging into my skin like talons. She pulled me slightly into the shade of the patio awning, away from the direct line of sight of the main crowd. Her fake smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of absolute chilling contempt. She leaned in so close her breath tickled my ear. "You are just a leech," she hissed, her voice a toxic, gravelly whisper. "A pathetic, grasping leech sucking my sun dry. But do not get too comfortable. Morgan, take a good look around. Today is the absolute last day you will ever set foot in this house." She let go of my arm abruptly, leaving angry red marks on my skin. She stepped back, her chin raised, expecting a dramatic reaction. She expected tears. She expected me to stutter, to beg, to ask her frantically what she meant by those words. She wanted the sick satisfaction of watching me break down in the middle of the party. I studied her face carefully. There was something very different about Lenora today. Her tone was not just malicious, it was dangerously triumphant. It lacked the usual petty, spontaneous frustration of her daily insults. She spoke with the absolute certainty of a woman who was already holding the winning lottery ticket. It was not a vague threat. It felt like a promise. She was far too confident. She was not trying to provoke a shouting match. She was waiting for a grand finale. The delivery felt rehearsed, like a crucial scene in a play she had spent weeks writing. They were waiting for a staged incident. I forced my muscles to relax. I let my shoulders slump forward slightly. I widened my eyes, letting a perfectly calculated amount of hurt and confusion wash over my features. I needed them to believe I was exactly the weak, emotional wreck they had categorized me as. If they thought I was broken, they would be sloppy. "I am sorry you feel that way, Lenora," I said softly, keeping my voice shaky and appropriately submissive. "I am just trying to make sure Poppy has a good birthday today." Lenora sneered, clearly satisfied with my pathetic display of weakness. "You always hide behind that child. Enjoy the party, Morgan, while it lasts." She turned on her heel and glided away, seamlessly rejoining the flock of gossiping relatives. I stood alone in the shade, my mind racing with terrifying speed. For the past several weeks, Wade had been dropping strange, unprompted comments. He had mentioned my erratic behavior to his golfing buddies. He had suggested, quite loudly during a dinner party, that I needed professional psychological help because I was working too much. He had even threatened, during a closed-door argument just 3 days ago, to file for emergency custody of Poppy, claiming my mental instability made me an unfit mother. I had previously brushed it off as his usual gaslighting, just another heavy-handed attempt to control me. But standing there, feeling the sting of Lenora's nails on my arm, the puzzle pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. They were not just trying to verbally bully me into a divorce, they were actively building a legal case against me. To do that quickly, they needed a public spectacle. They needed a crowd of wealthy, respectable, high society witnesses to testify in court that Morgan Rogers was dangerously unstable. They needed me to lose my mind, to scream, or to collapse in front of 50 people. I smoothed the skirt of my navy dress, taking a slow, deep breath. The blind panic they expected never came. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over my brain. I was a data analyst. I spent my days assessing massive corporate risks and finding hidden, destructive patterns. I was trained not to react blindly to emotional stimuli, but to process hard information. And right now, the data was screaming that I was walking straight into a coordinated ambush. I began to scan the yard, no longer playing the role of the gracious host, but operating as an observer, gathering vital intelligence. I tracked the caterers moving between the tables. I noted the specific clusters of guests. I mapped the exits. And then, my eyes locked onto the outdoor bar area. Wade was standing near the edge of the teakwood bar, holding a glass of amber bourbon. Lenora had just approached his side. They were not speaking. They did not need to. I watched closely as Lenora caught Wade's eye. It was a micro-expression, a fleeting exchange of a glance that lasted less than 2 seconds. But to someone paying close attention, it was louder than a gunshot. It was an unspoken signal. A silent, mutual confirmation. Wade gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, shifting his body weight slightly to angle his broad shoulders toward the bartender's station, effectively blocking the view of the guests to his left. Lenora turned her back to the crowd, casually positioning herself right next to the silver ice bucket. They were coordinating perfectly. The trap was set, and the main performance was about to begin. They genuinely thought they were the mastermind directors of this tragedy, pulling the strings of a naive, helpless wife who would stumble right into the pit they dug. They had absolutely no idea they were dealing with someone who had already mapped out their entire strategy. I did not turn away or run. I kept my eyes fixed on the bar, ready to let them play their hand. The reflection in the dark-tinted sliding glass doors of the sunroom offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the patio bar. It was a trick of the late afternoon light, turning the glass into a massive mirror. I watched the distorted, elongated shapes of my husband and my mother-in-law. Wade shifted his weight, widening his stance, casually leaning one elbow on the teakwood counter. To anyone else, he was just a relaxed host surveying his domain. To me, his body language screamed containment. He was building a visual wall, completely blocking the line of sight from the main cluster of guests near the pool, protected by Wade's shadow. Lenora moved. Her hand hovered over a tall, frosted glass filled with a pink, sparkling liquid. The bartender had just set it down on a designated silver napkin. It was my signature cocktail, the one they insisted on creating for the host. I caught another flash of movement, this time reflected on the polished curve of the silver champagne bucket, a tiny, white paper packet. Lenora pinched it between her manicured thumb and forefinger, tearing the corner with her teeth with a flick of her wrist. A cascade of fine white powder dissolved instantly into the fizzing drink. She casually stirred it with a metal swizzle stick, dropped the empty packet into her designer clutch, and stepped away, her face a mask of serene innocence. My pulse drummed a heavy, rhythmic beat in my ears, but my exterior remained perfectly still. The puzzle assembled itself in my mind with terrifying precision. For weeks, Wade had been laying the groundwork. The whispered conversations about my mental state, the loud, feigned concern over my ability to handle stress, the threat of emergency custody. They did not want to kill me. A dead wife leaves a messy life insurance investigation and a grieving child. A crazy wife, however, is a discarded asset. They needed a public breakdown. They needed me stumbling, slurring, perhaps hallucinating, or becoming violently hysterical in front of 50 of the most influential people in our social circle. They wanted a dozen wealthy witnesses to stand before a family court judge and swear that Morgan Rogers was an unfit mother who suffered a psychotic break at her own daughter's birthday party. The powder was a chemical shortcut to their desired verdict. Every instinct screamed at me to march over, grab the glass, and hurl it against the flagstone patio. I wanted to scream for the police, but I stopped myself. If I did that, I would look exactly like the paranoid, hysterical woman they were trying to paint me as. Lenora would simply deny it. Wade would play the devastated husband trying to calm his raving wife. The powder would wash away into the grass, and I would be holding nothing but empty accusations. I smoothed my features into a polite, oblivious smile and walked casually toward the bar. "Your drink, ma'am," the bartender said, offering me the frosted glass. "Thank you," I replied smoothly, wrapping my fingers around the cold condensation. The pink liquid looked entirely normal. I held it lightly, turning toward the yard, waiting for their next move, right on cue. Savannah Holloway materialized from the crowd. Wade's younger sister was the undisputed golden child of the family, a woman who had never worked a day in her life but carried herself with the arrogance of a ruling monarch. She was wearing a blindingly white designer dress, a stark contrast to my simple navy outfit. She zeroed in on me with a familiar, predatory gleam in her eyes. "Well, if it isn't the woman of the hour," Savannah drawled, stopping right in front of me, her voice pitched loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby guests. "Enjoying the free ride? Morgan, I hear Wade financed this whole little circus today. It must be so exhausting. Planning a party with someone else's money." I kept my grip steady on the glass. Savannah was the designated provocateur. Her job was to push my buttons, to elevate my heart rate, ensuring the drug would pump through my system faster once I took a sip. "It is a lovely party, Savannah," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Poppy is having a wonderful time." Savannah scoffed, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Please, we all know you only stay around for the lifestyle. You do not belong here. You never have. Mom was just saying how you looked completely overwhelmed today. Maybe you need a drink to calm your nerves." She gestured pointedly at the glass in my hand. A brilliant, wicked strategy formed in my mind. I did not need to break their trap. I just needed to change the target. Savannah was vain, fiercely competitive, and absolutely desperate to prove her dominance over me in every single interaction. I could use her arrogance against her. I let out a soft, condescending laugh. I looked at the drink, then looked back at Savannah, my eyes narrowing slightly in a silent challenge. "You know, Savannah, you talk a big game about belonging and power," I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure the surrounding guests were listening. "But the truth is, you always need your mother or your brother to fight your battles. You never actually take charge of anything yourself." Her eyes flashed with immediate, unfiltered anger. Her cheeks flushed beneath her heavy makeup. "Excuse me," I said. I continued, taking a deliberate step closer to her. "You are all talk. You cannot even handle a simple toast without looking for approval." I raised the poisoned glass, holding it between us. "Prove me wrong. Let us have a toast to the Holloway family, to standing on your own 2 feet. Or are you too scared to take the lead for once?" It was a direct hit to her inflated ego. Her desire to humiliate me completely overrode any logical thought. She saw the glass as a symbol of my defiance, and she needed to rip it away from me to establish her superiority. With a sharp, triumphant sneer, Savannah snatched the glass directly out of my hand. "I am not scared of anything, especially not you," she snapped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the edge of the patio. Lenora had turned back from her conversation. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she processed the scene. She took a frantic step forward, her hand reaching out. But she was 30 feet away. A wall of guests and a blasting speaker playing upbeat pop music stood between us. She could not scream without exposing her own crime. She was trapped in the agonizing silence of her own making. "To the Holloways!" Savannah declared loudly, raising the glass high. She brought the rim to her lips and drank. She did not just take a sip, fueled by spite and a desire to make a theatrical point. She swallowed down half the glass in 3 long gulps. I offered her a tight, polite smile. "Cheers!" I stepped back, blending seamlessly into the periphery of the crowd, keeping my eyes fixed on the golden child. It did not take long. The chemical Lenora had sourced was terrifyingly fast-acting. 4 minutes passed. Savannah was in the middle of a loud, animated story with a group of cousins when her voice suddenly trailed off. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if trying to clear a sudden fog. 5 minutes. She swayed on her expensive heels. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering violently against the flagstone patio. The sharp crash silenced the music. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Savannah?" one of the cousins asked, reaching out a hand. Savannah let out a bizarre, slurred moan. Her eyes rolled back, showing the whites, and her knees buckled completely. She collapsed in a heap of white designer fabric right in the middle of the yard, her limbs twitching erratically. The party erupted into sheer chaos. Women screamed. Men shouted for someone to call an ambulance. The pristine, perfectly curated illusion of the Holloway family shattered right alongside that glass. Wade and Lenora sprinted across the lawn, shoving guests aside. Lenora threw herself onto the grass next to her daughter, her face a mask of genuine, unscripted terror. She grabbed Savannah's shoulders, shaking her frantically. But they were professionals at playing the victim, and their pivot was instantaneous, even in the midst of a medical emergency. The script had to be maintained. Wade snapped his head up, his eyes scanning the terrified crowd until he locked onto me, standing calmly near the edge of the patio. He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "She did this!" Wade bellowed, his voice echoing across the yard, carrying over the rising panic. "Morgan gave her that drink. My wife did this to her." Lenora immediately joined the chorus, her wails perfectly pitched for maximum theatrical effect. "She poisoned my baby!" Morgan poisoned her. The 50 guests turned their collective gaze toward me, their faces twisted in shock and rising anger. I stood my ground. I did not flinch. I did not defend myself. I just looked at my husband and my mother-in-law, letting the cold reality of the situation settle over them. They had wanted a public spectacle, and I had given them a masterpiece. The game had officially begun. The sliding glass doors of the emergency room sealed shut behind the paramedics, cutting off the chaotic wail of the ambulance sirens. Inside the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting area. The air was thick with the suffocating smell of bleach and panic. I sat on a rigid plastic chair in the corner, perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, across the room. Lenora was giving the performance of a lifetime. She was draped dramatically over the reception desk, her expensive floral silk stained with sweat and dirt from the lawn. She sobbed with theatrical precision, clutching a damp tissue to her chest. "It was Morgan!" Lenora wailed, her voice carrying across the quiet waiting room, ensuring every nurse and passing orderly heard her. "My daughter was perfectly fine. Then Morgan gave her that glass. She handed it right to her. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. She poisoned my baby." Wade was pacing the linoleum floor, playing the role of the devastated, bewildered patriarch. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up just enough to look frantic but still photogenic. 2 uniformed police officers stood near the vending machines, taking notes on small pads, watching the family dynamic unfold. Wade stopped pacing and looked at the older officer, shaking his head in manufactured disbelief. "I do not want to believe it," he murmured, his voice thick with fake emotion. "She is my wife, but Morgan has been so erratic lately. She locks herself in her office for 12 hours a day. She talks to herself. Her temper is completely unpredictable. I have been telling my mother for 3 weeks that I am terrified for my family's safety. I just never thought she would actually do something like this." It was a masterful pivot. They had lost their primary victim when Savannah intercepted the drink, but they were not abandoning the script. They were simply adjusting the narrative. Wade was seamlessly laying the foundation for the unstable mother defense. He was establishing a documented history of mental decline right in front of law enforcement, creating a permanent police record of his supposed concerns. I did not cry. I did not defend myself. I did not rush over to scream at Wade for his blatant lies. I simply sat there, observing them with the detached fascination of a scientist watching rats navigate a maze. My absolute lack of visible emotion was unsettling to everyone in the room. The relatives who had followed the ambulance huddled together, casting nervous, sideways glances at me. They expected me to be hysterical. My silence was terrifying to them. It made me look exactly like the cold, calculating sociopath Wade was describing. The younger police officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a tight bun, separated from her partner and walked over to my corner. She stopped a few feet away, keeping a cautious distance. "Mrs. Holloway?" she asked, her tone neutral but guarded. "Morgan Rogers," I corrected her softly. I kept my maiden name. The officer blinked, clearly thrown by my calm demeanor. She clicked her pen. "Miss Rogers, can you walk me through exactly what happened in the backyard? Your mother-in-law and your husband are making some very serious allegations." I looked directly into her eyes. I did not use filler words. I did not offer emotional justifications. I gave her raw, unfiltered data. "I approached the outdoor bar at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon," I stated clearly. The bartender handed me a beverage. I held the glass in my right hand. Savannah Holloway approached me aggressively. She initiated a verbal altercation regarding the financing of the party. To prove a point, she forcefully took the glass from my hand. I did not offer it to her. She drank the contents. 5 minutes later, she collapsed. The officer frowned, scribbling furiously. "You did not try to stop her from taking the drink." "She is a grown woman," I replied smoothly, and she was highly agitated. I chose not to engage in a physical struggle over a cocktail at my 8-year-old daughter's birthday party. "Your mother-in-law claims she saw you tamper with the drink," the officer pressed, watching my face for a reaction. I did not take the bait. Accusing Lenora right now would just look like petty retaliation. It would become a classic he said, she said scenario, which favored the wealthy. Weeping older woman, I needed undeniable, documented proof. "I suggest you get that statement from Lenora strictly on the record," I said, leaning forward slightly. "In fact, I highly recommend you have both Lenora and Wade sign sworn statements detailing exactly what they claim they saw today. Have them do it tonight, while their memories are fresh." The officer stopped writing. "Why do you say that?" "Because if someone tampered with a beverage at a catered event with 50 guests, you have a crime scene to secure," I instructed her, shifting into the authoritative tone I used in corporate boardrooms. "I strongly advise you to dispatch a team back to the house immediately. You need to confiscate the trash receptacles behind the teakwood bar. You need to gather every shard of the broken glass from the patio. You must request the security camera footage from the perimeter of the estate. Obtain the full roster of the catering staff and secure the point-of-sale logs from the mobile bar." The officer stared at me, completely taken aback by my precise forensic demands. Suspects usually begged for lawyers or cried about their innocence. They did not usually map out the evidentiary collection process for the police before she could respond. The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open. A tall woman in a sharp gray suit walked in, carrying a leather briefcase. I recognized her immediately. It was Dr. Evelyn Vance, an expensive, high society family counselor who frequently attended Lenora's charity galas. Dr. Vance rushed straight over to Lenora, wrapping her arms around the weeping woman. "Lenora," I came as soon as I heard. "This is an absolute tragedy." I checked the clock on the wall. It had been exactly 45 minutes since Savannah collapsed. The hospital was a 30-minute drive from the house. Factoring in the chaos of the ambulance arrival and the time it takes to navigate hospital parking, Dr. Vance must have been notified almost immediately after Savannah hit the grass, perhaps even before. Wade walked over to the counselor, shaking his head. "Evelyn, thank you for coming. I am so worried about Savannah, and I am terrified about Morgan. You know what I have been telling you during our private consultations. She has completely lost her grip on reality." Dr. Vance nodded gravely, shooting a deeply concerned look in my direction. "I know, Wade, we have documented your concerns about her mental instability for the past 2 months. You have been a saint trying to hold this family together." The sudden arrival of the counselor was the most glaring error they had made so far. It was a beautiful, arrogant mistake. In their rush to build a wall of credible witnesses against me, They had deployed their expert character witness far too early. A normal family does not summon a marriage counselor to a medical emergency room within an hour of an accidental poisoning. You call a counselor when you are executing a premeditated strategy to declare a mother unfit. The police officers regrouped, speaking in hushed tones near the nurses' station. I knew they did not have enough to arrest me. There was no physical evidence tying me to any poison, only the contradictory testimonies of a highly emotional family, but I was undoubtedly their prime suspect. Wade and Lenora had successfully painted the picture of a dangerous, unhinged wife from across the room. Lenora briefly lowered her tissue. Her eyes met mine. The tears vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. She was assessing the situation, realizing that Savannah drinking the poison was a setback, but the core plan was still completely salvageable. They still had the police report. They still had the counselor's testimony. They still had the narrative. The younger officer walked back over to me. Ms. Rogers, you are free to go for now, but we strongly advise you not to leave the state. We will be in touch very soon. This is an active investigation. I understand, I said calmly. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy dress. I did not look at my husband. I did not look at the woman who tried to drug me, or the sister-in-law currently having her stomach pumped because of her own blinding arrogance. I picked up my purse and walked toward the sliding glass doors. The real war was not going to be fought in this brightly lit emergency room, surrounded by panicked nurses and manipulated police officers. It was going to be fought in a courtroom, buried in financial records, sworn affidavits, and unarguable data. They had fired the first shot, believing they controlled the battlefield. I stepped out into the muggy evening air, sliding my phone from my bag. It was time to lock them inside the very cage they had built for me. The drive back to the house took exactly 22 minutes. The roads were dark, the suburban streetlights casting long shadows over the manicured lawns. When I pulled my car into the driveway, the house was entirely silent, a stark contrast to the chaos of the afternoon. I walked up the stone steps to the front door and reached for the keypad. I pressed the 4 digits of my code. A sharp, angry red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again, thinking my finger had slipped. The red light blinked back at me. The heavy oak door swung open before I could attempt a third time. Wade stood in the threshold, his silhouette blocking the light from the grand foyer. He was no longer playing the weeping, devastated husband from the hospital. His face was set in a hard, triumphant sneer. He reached behind him, grabbed a medium-sized black suitcase, and hurled it onto the porch. It hit the stone with a loud thud, sliding to a stop against my shoes. "Do not bother trying the code," Wade said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are not stepping foot in this house again. Morgan." I looked down at the suitcase, then back up at his smug face. "It is my house too, Wade. My name is on the deed." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Not for long. My lawyer is filing the divorce papers first thing Monday morning, along with an emergency custody order. I have 50 people who watched you intentionally drug my sister today. 50 highly respected members of this community who will swear under oath that you are a dangerous, unstable woman who needs to be locked in a psychiatric ward. No judge will ever let you near this property." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from Wade, sent just seconds before he opened the door. It read, "I moved all the money from the joint accounts. Every single penny. Good luck finding a lawyer who works for free. Crazy lady." He was standing on the porch, his hand subtly angled in his pocket. He was recording me. He was waiting for the grand explosion. He wanted me to scream, to pound my fists against his chest, to sob and beg him for my money and my home. He needed that frantic audio file to play for the family court judge to solidify his narrative. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. I kept my hands perfectly relaxed at my sides, my breathing slow and even. "Where is Poppy?" I asked. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any panic or anger. Wade blinked, clearly thrown off rhythm by my total lack of hysterics. What? I asked you a simple question. Wade, where is my daughter? She is asleep in her room, he snapped, his jaw tightening as his provocation failed. My mother sent the nanny to bring her back before the police arrived. She did not see a thing, and she is staying right here with me. Where she is safe from you? Good, I said softly. Make sure she stays asleep. Do not wake her up with your shouting. I reached down, grabbed the handle of the suitcase, and turned my back on him. I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking rhythmically against the driveway. That is it, Wade yelled after me, his voice pitching higher in pure frustration. You are just going to walk away? You have nothing. Morgan, you have no money, no home, and you are going to lose your kid. I did not look back. I did not give him a single frame of footage for his little performance. I walked straight down the driveway, out of the heavy iron gates and onto the quiet suburban sidewalk. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and wet grass. I felt a profound, exhilarating sense of liberation. The suffocating charade of playing the meek, dependent wife was finally over. The gloves were off, and Wade had just handed me the exact justification I needed to dismantle his entire life. I walked for 2 blocks until I was absolutely certain I was out of range of any hidden security cameras Wade might have installed near the property line. I stopped under a street lamp, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I had memorized months ago. It rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. Gideon, I said. It is Morgan. Good evening, Morgan, Gideon Pike replied. My financial advisor was a man who rarely slept and never asked unnecessary questions. I saw the local news alerts regarding a medical emergency at your address. I assume the timeline has accelerated. They executed their play today, I confirmed, watching a moth flutter around the glowing bulb above me. Wade just locked me out of the house. He drained the joint checking and savings accounts. He believes I have 0 liquid assets and absolutely no legal recourse. Gideon let out a dry, humorless chuckle. How remarkably short-sighted of him. Shall we initiate the protocols? Yes, it is time to make some phone calls, I instructed, my pace steadying as I walked further down the affluent street. Get my corporate attorney on the line. We need to activate Harbor Vale Capital. For the past 6 years, my husband and his snobbish family believed I spent my days picking out curtains and browsing online boutiques. They mocked my home office. They thought my claim of being a data analyst was a cute, fabricated title to make myself feel important. They fundamentally failed to understand that data is power, and financial data is the ultimate weapon. Wade was a terrible businessman. He was entirely driven by ego, obsessed with expanding Holloway Crest developments faster than his capital allowed. He relied heavily on massive, short-term bridge loans to fund his luxury housing projects. 9 months ago, the regional bank that held his primary debt grew tired of his erratic financial reporting and decided to offload his portfolio at a steep discount to manage their own risk. Wade panicked when he found out. He spent weeks sweating, terrified that a predatory private equity firm would buy his debt and strip his company for parts. When an obscure, newly formed boutique investment fund called Harbor Vale Capital swooped in and purchased the entire debt package, Wade threw a lavish dinner to celebrate. He bragged endlessly about how his immense charm and sharp business acumen had secured a flexible, silent partner. He never bothered to look past the shell companies and the offshore registration. If he had dug just an inch deeper, he would have discovered that his quiet, unassuming wife was the sole managing director and primary financial backer of Harbor Vale Capital. I owned his debt, I owned his company. I have the master loan agreements pulled up right now, Gideon said, the rapid sound of a keyboard clacking echoing through the phone. We have multiple triggers available. Which one do you want to use? Let us hit him with the financial and ethical violation clauses, I said, a cold smile finally touching my lips. Over the past 12 months, I have compiled extensive documentation of Wade commingling corporate funds with his personal accounts to pay for his mother's extravagant vacations. I also have the logs of his fraudulent expense reporting. He has been using company money to hire private investigators and fake family consultants to build this custody case against me. That is a direct violation of the Material Adverse Change Clause, as well as the strict moral turpitude covenant. Gideon confirmed, his tone entirely professional, despite the devastating nature of the order. We are well within our legal rights to call the loans immediately due and payable. Do it, I commanded. Send the official notice of default to his chief financial officer. Carbon copy his entire board of directors and every single minority shareholder. I want all of his corporate credit lines completely frozen by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want his payroll accounts locked. I want his major vendors notified that Holloway Crest is in severe breach of its financial obligations. Consider it done, Gideon said smoothly. He will not be able to buy a cup of coffee with company money by the time he wakes up. Where will you be staying tonight? I booked a suite at the Four Seasons downtown 3 days ago under my maiden name, I replied, spotting the black town car I had ordered pulling up to the curb. I will meet you and the legal team there at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We have a lot of work to do. I hung up the phone and opened the door to the waiting car. I slid into the leather seat, watching the sprawling suburban mansions roll past the tinted windows. Wade had stood on that porch, his chest puffed out, fully convinced he had just pushed me out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on my back. He genuinely believed he was the brilliant architect of my destruction. He had no idea that by throwing me out, he had just kicked away the only scaffolding keeping his entire fragile empire from collapsing into dust. He thought he had starved me out. He was about to learn that I owned the bank, I owned the water supply. And I was shutting it all down. The sun rose on Friday morning, casting a bright, unforgiving light over the city. By 8:30, I was sitting at a mahogany table in the corner suite of the Four Seasons, sipping black coffee and watching the stock ticker on my laptop. Across town, Wade was stepping out of his luxury vehicle and striding into the glass-fronted lobby of Holloway Crest Developments. I did not need to be there to know exactly how the scene was playing out. I had Gideon feeding me live updates. Wade walked into a corporate war zone. His chief financial officer met him at the elevator bank, pale and visibly shaking. The operating accounts were completely locked. The payroll system, scheduled to execute automatic direct deposits for over 200 employees at 9 o'clock, was frozen solid. 3 major lumber suppliers had already called, threatening to halt all deliveries to their active residential construction sites because their latest invoices had bounced. Wade tried to play the stoic chief executive. He gathered his small board of directors and the panicked minority shareholders in the glass-walled conference room. He assured them it was a simple banking error, a minor administrative glitch that he would sort out by noon. But beneath his tailored suit, he was undoubtedly sweating. He could not comprehend why his silent, flexible creditor, Harbor Vale Capital, had suddenly and aggressively called in the massive short-term loans. The timing made absolutely no sense to him. He was completely blind to the fact that his arrogant actions the previous afternoon had directly triggered his own financial execution. While Wade was drowning in frozen assets and angry contractors, Lenora was busy opening a second front. Since their initial attempt to have me arrested in the hospital emergency room had stalled, she pivoted to a far more dangerous arena, the court of public opinion. She understood that if she could not get me locked in a jail cell immediately, she could at least destroy my reputation and force me into absolute submission. By 10 o'clock, a notification flashed on my tablet screen. Savannah had woken up. She was no longer in critical condition, but she was still in her hospital bed, looking appropriately frail and pale. And she was holding a smartphone, broadcasting live to her tens of thousands of social media followers. I clicked the link. Savannah was staring into the camera lens, tears streaming down her carefully unmade-up face. Lenora had clearly coached her on every single word. Savannah choked out a terrifying, completely fabricated narrative. She claimed that I had always been intensely jealous of her, that I was deeply disturbed, and that I had intentionally handed her a spiked drink to eliminate her from the family. The broadcast did not stop there. It was spliced with short, shaky video clips taken by other guests at the birthday party. The footage showed Savannah collapsing on the grass. Then, the video cut to a zoomed-in shot of me. I was standing near the edge of the patio, my face perfectly calm, simply watching the chaos unfold, out of context, stripped of the reality that I was observing a staged trap. My absolute lack of reaction looked incredibly sinister. I looked cold. I looked exactly like the cruel, calculating monster they were describing, within an hour. The video had been shared 50,000 times. Wade immediately capitalized on the momentum. He shared Savannah's broadcast on all of his professional and personal networking pages. He added a long, emotional caption detailing his supposed agony. He wrote about how he was just a terrified father trying to protect his innocent 8-year-old daughter from a deeply troubled woman who had managed to hide her dark, unstable nature behind closed doors. He effectively weaponized Poppy, turning our private family conflict into a viral true crime spectacle for the internet to consume. The backlash was instantaneous and violent. Strangers from across the country flooded the comment sections, calling for my immediate arrest, demanding that Child Protective Services take Poppy away from me permanently. Then, the internet sleuths did exactly what Lenora hoped they would do. They dug into my background. They quickly discovered that I was not just a stay-at-home mother. They found the corporate registration for my actual company, Meridian Quiet Risk Analytics. For the past 5 years, I had built Meridian from the ground up, providing specialized risk assessment algorithms for mid-sized healthcare networks. It was a highly profitable, entirely legitimate enterprise that Wade had always dismissed as my little hobby. Now, it was the target of a coordinated digital mob. My corporate inbox began filling with hundreds of hate emails. People left scathing one-star reviews on our business pages, accusing the founder of being a dangerous criminal. At noon, my personal cell phone rang. It was David, the chief executive officer of Blue Mesa Care Alliance. We had spent the last 6 months negotiating a massive, multi-year software integration contract worth roughly $4 million. We were scheduled to sign the final paperwork on Monday morning. "Morgan," David said, his voice tight and incredibly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but we have to pause the contract. The board saw the videos circulating online this morning. The public relations department is having a total meltdown. We cannot associate our corporate brand with this kind of severe public controversy. We are putting everything on hold indefinitely pending an official legal resolution." "I understand, David," I replied evenly, not bothering to beg or offer frantic explanations. "I will be in touch when the situation is fully resolved." I ended the call and set the phone down on the mahogany table. I had just lost a multi-million-dollar deal. My professional reputation was being shredded in real time. My face was plastered across the internet as a villainous, unhinged wife. A minute later, a text message from Wade lit up my screen. "Look at what you are doing to yourself." The message read, "This is getting completely out of hand. The internet is destroying you, Morgan, and the police are going to build a case eventually. But I can make this stop. I can put out a statement saying you are seeking residential psychiatric help. I can calm everyone down, just sign the asset forfeiture agreement, and sign over full legal and physical custody of Poppy to me today. Do the right thing before you lose absolutely everything." It was a classic, heavy-handed extortion tactic. He was squeezing the vice, offering me a tiny sliver of mercy if I surrendered my daughter and my financial independence. He thought I was sitting in my hotel room, sobbing uncontrollably, terrified of the public mob and ready to concede defeat. He was completely wrong. I did not reply to his text message. I did not release a frantic public statement defending my character. I did not engage in pointless online arguments with anonymous internet trolls. Instead, I opened a secure, encrypted folder on my laptop. I labeled it Exhibit C Defamation and Tortious Interference. I systematically downloaded Savannah's entire livestream. I archived Wade's emotional social media posts. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single threat, every defamatory comment, and every malicious share. I exported the cancellation email from Blue Mesa Care Alliance, documenting the exact, quantifiable financial loss caused by their smear campaign. I saved Wade's text message, clearly highlighting his blatant attempt to use a manufactured public crisis to extort a favorable custody arrangement. I sat in the quiet luxury of the hotel suite, the city bustling outside my window, and I methodically gathered the ammunition. To the outside world, Morgan Rogers was losing on every conceivable front. I was broke, homeless, hated, and professionally ruined, but inside that room, I was untouchable. They thought they were burying me under a mountain of public outrage. They failed to realize that every video they posted, every lie they told, and every dollar they cost my business was simply adding zeros to the massive civil lawsuit I was building against them. They were doing all the heavy lifting for me. I just had to sit back, stay absolutely silent, and let them climb higher and higher, ensuring that when the floor finally dropped out from under them, the fall would be utterly catastrophic. Earlier that same Friday morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, there was a sharp knock on the door of my hotel suite. I opened it to find Tessa Boone standing in the hallway, holding two thick leather briefcases. Tessa was a former state prosecutor who had built a terrifying reputation for dismantling corrupt politicians before moving to the private sector. She now ran Boone and Vale Litigation, a boutique firm that handled the kind of high-stakes, ruthless disputes that standard divorce attorneys were entirely unequipped to manage. Tessa walked into the room, dropping the heavy briefcases onto the glass dining table. She did not bother with pleasantries. She pulled out a legal pad and looked at me with piercing brown eyes. "I watched the party videos already circulating online," Tessa said, taking a seat and opening her laptop. "It is a highly effective piece of theater. Wade is already using it as the foundation for an emergency custody petition. He filed it an hour ago. He wants a judge to grant him immediate, exclusive physical custody of Poppy by Monday morning." I sat down across from her, my expression unchanged. "On what grounds?" "Severe emotional instability and physical endangerment," Tessa replied, sliding a printed copy of the petition across the table. He included sworn affidavits from Lenora and 3 other family members claiming they witnessed you deliberately poison Savannah. They are pushing for a completely closed hearing, arguing that you are a flight risk and a danger to the child. Tessa leaned forward, tapping her silver pen against the table. "Morgan, we have enough preliminary data to go to the police right now. We can show them the financial leverage you hold. We can explain the motive. We can blow up his narrative before the weekend is over and get you back into that house." I looked down at Wade's signature at the bottom of the legal filing. It was bold and arrogant. He was so confident in his fabricated reality. "No," I said quietly, sliding the paper back to her. "Going to the police right now results in a messy investigation. Wade will hire a defense attorney. Lenora will claim she was just confused about what she saw. Savannah will say the trauma clouded her memory. They will muddy the waters, and I will be stuck co-parenting with a man who actively tried to destroy my sanity. I do not want a messy draw. I want a definitive slaughter." Tessa stopped tapping her pen. A slow, appreciative smile spread across her face. "You want them to testify." "Exactly," I confirmed. "I want Wade and Lenora to stand in front of a family court judge, raise their right hands, and swear under penalty of perjury that their fabricated story is the absolute truth. I want them to submit those fraudulent affidavits into the official court record. Once they cross that line, it is no longer just a family dispute, it is a felony. Tessa nodded, her prosecutor instincts fully ignited. Then we need an airtight net. I have already drafted the emergency subpoenas. We are serving the country club venue today. I want every single frame of security footage from the patio, the hallways, and the parking lot. We are pulling the point-of-sale logs from the outdoor bar to establish the exact timeline of when your drink was ordered and when it was placed on the counter. My paralegals are interviewing the catering staff to get signed statements regarding who was standing near the preparation area. We need location data too, I added. Subpoena the cell tower records for Lenora, Wade, and the marriage counselor who showed up at the hospital. I want to prove they were communicating in the minutes immediately following the collapse. Done, Tessa said, making a quick note on her pad. But here is something that will make your day. You remember that digital forensics expert you asked me to hire 3 months ago? I nodded. Months before Wade started hinting at my supposed mental decline, I had noticed severe discrepancies in the operating budgets of Holloway Crest developments, suspecting he was embezzling corporate funds to cover his lavish personal expenses. I had quietly authorized Tessa to bring in a forensic accountant to shadow his accounts. The expert finished tracing the shell company Wade set up in Delaware, Tessa explained, turning her laptop screen toward me. He is not just embezzling to pay for Lenora's country club dues. Look at these wire transfers from the past 6 weeks. I scanned the spreadsheet. There were 4 separate payments, each for $10,000, sent to a company called Apex Behavioral Solutions. What is Apex? I asked. It is a shadow firm, Tessa replied. They specialize in creating retroactive psychological profiles for aggressive divorce litigation. Wade has been paying them to draft a fake, highly damaging assessment of your parenting capacity. He literally bought a medical diagnosis to use against you in court. A cold wave of anger washed over me, quickly replaced by a sharp, tactical focus. Wade had not just acted on a whim, he had financed a systemic assassination of my character using the very money I had allowed his company to borrow. Tessa hit another key on her laptop, bringing up a photograph. It showed a man in a gray suit standing near the valet station at the birthday party. And it gets worse. My investigator identified this man from the background of one of the social media videos. His name is Marcus Vance. He is a licensed private investigator. Wade hired him 2 weeks ago. He was on the guest list yesterday under a fake name. The final piece of their trap locked into place. They hired a professional to film the breakdown. I realized aloud. They knew I would not react the way they wanted unless I was pushed to the absolute edge. They brought a cameraman to ensure my engineered panic attack was recorded in high definition. It proves premeditation, Tessa agreed, her voice dropping to a serious register. They planned the poisoning. Morgan. They planned to film the aftermath. This is textbook criminal conspiracy. Tessa closed her laptop. But Morgan, if we let this play out in family court on Monday, you have to endure a brutal weekend. Your business is already taking hits. The public narrative is completely against you. Are you absolutely certain you do not want me to issue a cease and desist to the media outlets? We can slow the bleeding. Do not issue anything, I instructed firmly. Every hour that Blue Mesa Care Alliance keeps our $4 million contract suspended is another massive line item on the civil damages lawsuit we will file next month. Let Wade and Lenora go on television. Let them post more videos. I want the total financial damage to be so catastrophic that the court has no choice but to award me every single asset the Holloway family possesses to make me whole. Just as I finished speaking, my personal phone vibrated on the table. It was an unknown number. I ignored it, but a text message immediately followed. I opened the message. It was just one sentence. My mother knew that glass had a problem. I stared at the screen, analyzing the syntax and the underlying panic. There was only one person who would send that message from an untraceable number this morning. It is Savannah, I told Tessa, handing her the phone. Tessa read the text, her eyebrows raising in surprise. She is wavering. She woke up in a hospital bed, weak and terrified, and the very first thing Lenora did was shove a camera in her face and force her to perform for the internet. I reasoned, picturing the dynamic. Savannah is arrogant, but she is not stupid. She realizes she was collateral damage. Lenora did not care that her own daughter almost died, as long as the plan moved forward. "Do you trust her?" Tessa asked, handing the phone back. "Absolutely not," I said. Savannah will always protect herself first. But this text is the first crack in their alliance. It means she is scared. It means she knows perjury carries a prison sentence, and she is trying to build a secret bridge to me just in case her mother's plan fails. I deleted the text message from my screen, but I knew Tessa's team had already captured the incoming data on their secure servers. We do not reply, I decided. We let Savannah sweat. We let Lenora and Wade walk into the courtroom on Monday morning, completely convinced they have outsmarted the quiet, dependent wife. I looked out the window at the sprawling city skyline, knowing my daughter was somewhere out there, temporarily held captive by a family built on lies. Choosing to wait was agonizing. My maternal instinct screamed to kick down Wade's door and take Poppy back by force, but I had to protect her future, not just her present. A quick victory with a police report would leave the Holloway family wounded but alive, free to scheme and plot their next attack. I was not interested in a skirmish. I was going to let them stand before the judge, lay out their grand, deceitful masterpiece. And then I was going to burn their entire world to ash. I chose the harder battle. I chose total annihilation. The pressure inside my hotel suite mounted with every passing hour of the weekend. By Friday afternoon, Wade had officially filed an ex parte emergency custody petition. He was demanding sole legal and physical custody of our daughter, arguing that I posed an immediate, life-threatening danger to her well-being. He did not just submit standard paperwork. He attached the heavily edited social media videos, the damning hospital toxicology reports from the emergency room, and a beautifully crafted, sworn affidavit from his mother detailing my supposed unprovoked attack to guarantee a swift and brutal victory. Wade retained Victor Harlan. Harlan was a notoriously aggressive family law attorney in the city, a man who charged $2,000 an hour to verbally decimate opposing parties. He was a shark in a tailored suit, famous for burying his opponents under mountains of intimidating legal filings before they even stepped foot in a courtroom, while Wade was weaponizing the legal system. His mother was celebrating a premature victory through mutual acquaintances. I learned that Lenora had transformed her Saturday afternoon into a triumphant social gathering. She hosted a lavish luncheon at the country club with her wealthiest friends. She paraded around the dining room, playing the role of the traumatized but resilient matriarch. She loudly proclaimed to anyone who would listen that she was finally reclaiming her family honor. She even boasted about her upcoming plans to completely gut and remodel my house the moment the judge formally evicted me, laughing about how quickly she would erase my presence from the property. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they failed to anticipate my countermove regarding our daughter. I knew Wade intended to parade Poppy around his house, using her as a prop for his tragic single-father narrative while the local media camped at his front gates. I could not allow her to be exposed to that toxic environment or hear a single word of their smear campaign. Early Saturday morning, Tessa filed an emergency protective injunction with a secondary judge, citing the severe media circus Wade had intentionally generated at his residence. We argued that the intense public scrutiny created a psychologically damaging environment for an 8-year-old child. The judge agreed immediately, within 4 hours. An order was issued transferring Poppy to the temporary care of my older sister, a woman who lived 2 hours away in a quiet, rural town with absolutely no media footprint. Wade was furious, but he had to comply or risk looking uncooperative before the main hearing. Poppy was safe, completely shielded from the internet and her father's manipulation, with my daughter secured. Tessa and I turned our entire focus to the war room we had established in the hotel suite. The walls were covered with large whiteboards filled with diagrams and printed photographs. Tessa was building a meticulous, minute-by-minute timeline of the birthday party. "Look at the progression," Tessa said, drawing a thick black line connecting a series of photographs on the board. At exactly 4 minutes past 4 o'clock, the bartender mixes the drink. At 5 minutes past the hour, Lenora approaches the bar. At 6 minutes past the hour, Wade shifts his body weight to block the sightline from the main patio. At 9 minutes past the hour, Savannah grabs the glass from your hand. At 14 minutes past the hour, she collapses. And at precisely 15 minutes past the hour, before the paramedics are even dialed, Lenora makes a 30-second phone call to Dr. Vance, the family counselor. It was a flawless, undeniable sequence of premeditation. But the timeline was only the framework. We needed the physical anchor. Late Saturday night, Tessa's private investigation team delivered the ultimate prize, following my instructions from the hospital. They had raced to the event venue on Thursday evening and legally secured the garbage bags from the outdoor bar before the waste management company collected them. Inside a sticky plastic bag smelling of stale beer and lime juice, they found the torn white packet. Tessa held up a clear evidence bag containing the small, crumpled square of paper. We rushed this to an independent laboratory. The interior residue perfectly matches the rapid-acting sedative found in Savannah's toxicology report. More importantly, the exterior of the packet has 2 distinct sets of fingerprints. One set belongs to the bartender, who likely moved it when wiping the counter. The other set, heavily concentrated on the torn corner, will undoubtedly match Lenora. "And the purchase history?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the massive adrenaline rush. "My forensic accountant traced it," Tessa replied, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Lenora is incredibly wealthy, but she is completely inept with digital footprints. She did not use her primary credit card. She used a secondary, low-limit account she usually reserves for household expenses. She had her personal housekeeper purchase the chemical compound from a sketchy overseas agricultural supplier 3 weeks ago. We have the digital receipt, the shipping manifesto, and the delivery confirmation to Lenora's private residential address. We had the weapon. We had the fingerprints. We had the receipt. It was enough to destroy them instantly. We add this to the preliminary disclosure packet tonight," Tessa suggested, reaching for her laptop. "If we show Harlan this evidence now, he will force Wade to drop the custody petition immediately to save himself from criminal charges." "No," I commanded, stopping her hand. "Do not disclose the packet. Do not disclose the receipt, and absolutely do not mention the synchronized venue camera footage or the audio logs." Tessa looked at me, her brow furrowed in a rare moment of hesitation. "Morgan, if we withhold this until the middle of the trial, it is a massive risk. The judge could rule it inadmissible due to late discovery." "I am not playing for a settlement. Tessa, I want them to bleed," I stated with absolute, icy conviction. "If we show Harlan our hand now, Wade and Lenora will just claim it was a terrible misunderstanding. They will refuse to testify. And they will hide behind their constitutional right to remain silent. I want them to walk into that courtroom feeling invincible. I want Victor Harlan to call them to the witness stand. I want them to swear on a Bible and lie directly to the face of a judge. Let them go as far down the path of perjury as humanly possible." Tessa slowly pulled her hands away from the keyboard. She recognized the ruthless strategy and entirely approved of it. Across town, the pressure of maintaining the massive lie was beginning to fracture the weakest link in their alliance. Savannah was physically recovering, but her psychological state was crumbling. Lenora was relentlessly pushing her to play the perfect victim. She forced Savannah to do follow-up online posts, demanding she sit in front of ring lights and repeat the fabricated story to news outlets. But Savannah knew the truth. She knew I had seen the trap. She knew her mother had callously watched her drink a highly dangerous chemical without uttering a single word of warning. The crushing weight of that betrayal, combined with the terrifying realization that she was legally implicating herself in a criminal conspiracy by lying to the police, was making her increasingly unstable. She was a ticking time bomb, completely isolated by her own family's ambition, her subtle, panicked text message to me was proof that the golden child was finally realizing she was completely expendable. Sunday night descended over the city like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the hotel suite, watching the streetlights flicker on in the distance. The battle lines were perfectly drawn. Wade was likely sitting in his massive, empty house, drinking expensive bourbon and celebrating his impending victory. He believed he had outsmarted me. He believed Monday morning would be a mere formality, a simple hearing where a judge would look at my apparent poverty, my manufactured madness, and officially hand him complete control over my child and my assets. Everything looked exactly as Wade wanted it to look. He thought all he had to do was walk into the courthouse and claim his prize. That was precisely the illusion I needed him to believe. Monday morning arrived with the suffocating humidity typical of a southern summer. When Tessa and I stepped out of the black town car in front of the county courthouse, the glaring flashbulbs of local press cameras immediately blinded us. Over the weekend, Wade and Lenora had successfully transformed a private family dispute into a viral digital spectacle. Savannah's tearful broadcast had amassed hundreds of thousands of views, and the media hounds were practically foaming at the mouth for a glimpse of the allegedly unhinged mother. Reporters shouted questions, pushing microphones toward my face, but I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, walking silently through the heavy bronze doors. Inside, courtroom number 4. The air conditioning was turned down to a freezing temperature, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Judge Elaine Broderick sat behind the elevated mahogany bench, peering over her reading glasses with a stern, no-nonsense expression. She had a reputation for prioritizing the immediate physical safety of children above all else, making her the perfect audience for Wade's manufactured crisis. At the plaintiff's table, Wade and Lenora sat shoulder to shoulder. They had dressed meticulously for their roles. Lenora wore a modest, high-necked gray suit, devoid of her usual flashy jewelry, portraying the exhausted, traumatized grandmother. Wade wore a simple navy blazer, his posture slumped just enough to convey the heavy burden of a heartbroken father trying to save his 8-year-old daughter. Standing beside them was Victor Harlan. The $2,000 an hour attorney smoothed his expensive silk tie and approached the podium with the smooth, predatory grace of a seasoned litigator. "Your Honor," Harlan began, his voice a rich, resonant baritone that instantly commanded the room. "We are here today because a child is in imminent, life-threatening danger. We are not asking for a permanent dissolution of marriage at this exact moment. We are asking you to recognize a horrifying pattern of escalating psychological instability and grant my client immediate, sole emergency custody of his daughter to prevent a tragedy." Harlan did not waste time. He immediately directed the court's attention to a large monitor set up facing the judge. He pressed a button, and the heavily edited live-stream video of Savannah filled the courtroom. Savannah's tear-streaked face and panicked voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls, accusing me of a deliberate, vicious attack. Harlan followed the video by formally entering the hospital toxicology reports into evidence, detailing the severe, life-threatening nature of the chemical ingested by my sister-in-law. The respondent, Morgan Rogers, has lived a life of absolute privilege, entirely provided for by my client. Harlan continued, pacing slowly in front of the bench. Yet, instead of gratitude, she has harbored a deep, toxic resentment toward his family. She is parasitic. She is deeply jealous of her sister-in-law. And as you will hear today, her emotional state has deteriorated so severely that she resorted to attempted murder in broad daylight, showing absolutely no remorse for her actions. He was echoing the exact phrases Lenora had hissed at me for years. It was a brilliantly coordinated narrative. Harlan called Lenora to the witness stand first. She walked up the wooden steps slowly, placing her hand on the Bible and swearing to tell the whole truth. She settled into the witness chair and looked directly at Judge Broderick with wide, tear-filled eyes. Under Harlan's gentle, guiding questions, Lenora delivered an Academy Award-winning performance. She described the birthday party as a beautiful, loving family event that I deliberately destroyed. I saw her, Lenora testified, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated sorrow. I saw Morgan lurking near the outdoor bar for a long time. She looked incredibly agitated when Savannah kindly approached her to say hello. Morgan practically forced that glass into her hands. And, Your Honor, when my beautiful daughter collapsed on the grass and started convulsing, I looked up. Morgan was just standing there. She had this terrible, cold smile on her face. It was the most chilling thing I have ever seen. It was pure, unadulterated perjury. She was lying under oath, adding malicious, fabricated details to cement the image of a psychopath. Next, Harlan called Wade to the stand. My husband took the oath and sat down, rubbing his face as if exhausted by months of secret agony. His job was to build the medical foundation for his mother's dramatic accusations. Wade, can you describe your wife's behavior over the past 6 months? Harlan asked sympathetically. It has been terrifying. Wade lied smoothly, looking down at his hands. She completely withdrew from our family. She locks herself in her office for 10 or 12 hours a day, claiming she is working on secret data projects. Sometimes I hear her in there, just talking to herself for hours. She became paranoid, constantly accusing my mother and sister of plotting against her. I begged her to seek psychiatric help, but she refused. I tried to hold it together for our daughter, but after what she did to Savannah, I know I cannot protect my little girl if Morgan is allowed back in that house. Wade was brilliantly weaponizing my actual career. As a data analyst managing complex algorithms, I obviously worked long hours in a focused environment. I often read data points aloud to myself while troubleshooting code. He took the mundane reality of my professional life and twisted it into the symptoms of a severe psychotic break. Throughout this entire hour of brutal character assassination, I did not move. I sat perfectly still beside Tessa at the defense table. I held a yellow legal pad and a pen, quietly taking notes. I did not shake my head in denial. I did not gasp. I did not shoot angry glares at my husband. My absolute stoicism was exactly what Harlan wanted the judge to see. Your Honor, look at the respondent right now, Harlan said, turning his body to point directly at me. She is sitting there, listening to her family describe a near-fatal poisoning, and she has not shed a single tear. She shows zero emotional affect. This is the cold-blooded detachment of a woman who poses a severe, immediate threat to the community and, most importantly, to an innocent child. A low murmur rippled through the gallery where a few local reporters had been allowed to sit. The entire room believed I was a monster. They thought I was sitting there, frozen in quiet defeat, completely crushed by the overwhelming weight of their evidence. Judge Broderick leaned forward, resting her elbows on the thick mahogany bench. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with profound distaste and heavy skepticism. She had seen countless custody battles, but the combination of the viral video, the hospital records, and the cohesive, tearful testimony of an entire family was clearly pushing her toward a swift decision. Counselor Boone, Judge Broderick said, addressing Tessa with a sharp, impatient tone. The petitioner has presented a highly disturbing, heavily corroborated narrative of physical endangerment. In family court, the safety of the minor child supersedes all other matters. I am telling you right now, unless the defense is prepared to offer overwhelming concrete counter-evidence during cross-examination, I am heavily inclined to grant the petitioner's request for temporary sole custody and a strict restraining order before we recess for lunch. Wade let out a soft, audible exhale of relief. Lenora reached over and squeezed his arm, a tiny, victorious smirk playing on her lips. They thought the gavel was already coming down. They thought they had won the war in a single morning. They had absolutely no idea that I had let them build their beautiful, perjured house of cards just so I could let them watch it completely collapse. Tessa stood up slowly, her silver pen glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. She did not offer a passionate, emotional opening statement to counter Victor Harlan. Tessa operated entirely on logic, turning the courtroom into a surgical theater. Mrs. Holloway, Tessa began, her voice perfectly level as she approached the witness stand. You testified moments ago that you were entirely consumed by terror when your daughter collapsed on the grass. Lenora dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. Yes, it was the worst moment of my entire life. I see, Tessa said, picking up a bound document from our table. According to the subpoenaed cell tower records, Savannah collapsed at exactly 14 minutes past 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At precisely 15 minutes past 4 o'clock, just 60 seconds later, you dialed a number from your mobile phone. You did not call for an ambulance. You called Dr. Evelyn Vance, a family counselor. Can you explain to the court why, as your daughter was convulsing on the ground, your very first instinct was to call a marriage therapist? Lenora visibly stiffened. The calculated sorrow on her face fractured into genuine confusion. I was in shock. I needed someone I trusted. You needed a character witness against my client to arrive at the hospital, Tessa corrected sharply. You needed the narrative established immediately. Harlan jumped to his feet. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness with wild speculation. Sustained, Judge Broderick ruled, though her eyes lingered on Lenora with a new, scrutinizing weight. Move along, Counselor Boone. Tessa pivoted flawlessly. She called the bartender to the stand. The young man, still looking terrified by the legal setting, swore his oath. Did Morgan Rogers ask you to alter her cocktail in any way? Tessa asked. No, ma'am. The bartender replied firmly. I made the standard recipe. I set it on the bar. She picked it up. She did not open her purse. She did not add anything to the glass. And how did the glass leave her possession? Tessa pressed. The other lady, the blonde one, she marched right up, he explained, gesturing with his hands. She was yelling something. Then she reached out and aggressively snatched the glass right out of Mrs. Rogers' hand. Mrs. Rogers never offered it to her. Harlan was up again for cross-examination, his tone dripping with condescension. But surely, the respondent was holding the glass out, provoking the situation. She was taunting her sister-in-law. Yes, she was just holding it, the bartender insisted, though he looked intimidated by Harlan's aggressive posture. Tessa returned to the podium, her pace quickening. She submitted our first piece of visual evidence. It was a single, high-definition still frame pulled from the venue's interior hallway camera. It showed Wade leaning heavily against the outdoor bar, his broad shoulders completely obscuring the view of the ice bucket from the main patio. I direct the court's attention to the petitioner's exact positioning, Tessa stated. Mr. Holloway is intentionally blocking the line of sight for the entire party at the precise minute the drink was poisoned. This is absurd, Harlan scoffed loudly, waving a hand dismissively. It is a coincidental posture. A man leaning on a bar at a party is not a criminal conspiracy. Your Honor, the defense is throwing shadows to distract you from the toxicological facts. Tessa did not flinch. She submitted the evidence bag containing the torn white packet, alongside the financial records tracing the purchase to Lenora's secondary account. The courtroom grew deathly quiet as the judge reviewed the documents. This packet was recovered from the trash receptacle directly behind the bar where Lenora Holloway was standing, Tessa declared. It contains the exact chemical compound found in Savannah Holloway's blood, and it was purchased 3 weeks ago by Lenora's personal housekeeper. For a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across Wade's face. He looked at his mother, whose jaw was clenched so tightly her teeth might shatter. But Harlan was a $2,000 an hour lawyer for a reason. He slammed his fist onto his table. Your Honor, this is outrageous. A torn packet in a public trash can proves absolutely nothing about who put it in the glass. My client buys agricultural supplies for her rose garden. This is a desperate, circumstantial smear campaign. We are here today to discuss temporary custody because the respondent is an immediate threat to a child, not to entertain wild conspiracy theories. Judge Broderick rubbed her temples. The absolute certainty she held an hour ago was gone, replaced by deep, uncomfortable hesitation. She looked at the evidence, then at Wade, and finally at me. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Tessa had poked massive holes in the timeline and proven Lenora possessed the poison. But Harlan was right about one critical, glaring detail. We had not yet shown the judge the actual moment the poison entered the glass. Without that direct link, the safety of the child still hung in the balance, and family courts notoriously defaulted to the petitioner when the waters were muddy. Counselor Boone, you have raised serious questions, Judge Broderick said slowly. But I need concrete proof of who tampered with that beverage before I dismiss a father's plea for his daughter's safety. Before Tessa could respond, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A collective gasp swept through the small gallery. Savannah Holloway stood in the doorway. She looked incredibly pale, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her weakened frame. Wade let out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. Lenora's face lit up with a triumphant, predatory smile. They believed their golden child had arrived to deliver the final, lethal blow to my defense. Savannah slowly made her way down the aisle and took the oath. Harlan practically sprinted to the podium, his confidence fully restored. Savannah, thank you for being here despite your severe trauma. Harlan cooed sympathetically. Can you tell the court exactly what Morgan Rogers did to you? Savannah gripped the edges of the witness box. Her voice was faint, trembling slightly. She recited the exact script her mother had relentlessly drilled into her over the weekend. Morgan was angry. She looked at me with this terrible smile. She pushed the glass toward me and told me to drink it. She wanted to hurt me. Wade nodded vigorously. Lenora wiped a fake tear from her cheek. They thought it was over. Tessa walked to the podium. She did not raise her voice. She did not attack Savannah's character. She simply locked eyes with the terrified, broken woman on the stand. Savannah, you are under oath, Tessa said softly. A penalty of perjury carries a mandatory prison sentence in this state. I want you to think very carefully about your next words. Savannah's hands began to shake violently against the wooden rail. Did Morgan push the glass toward you? Or did you snatch it to prove you were not intimidated? Tessa asked, stepping closer. Did she smile? Or are you just repeating the exact phrase your mother ordered you to say? Savannah swallowed hard. She looked at Tessa. Then her eyes darted toward the plaintiff's table. She desperately avoided looking at Lenora. She stared at the floor, her breathing shallow and rapid. I took it, Savannah stammered, her voice cracking. I grabbed the glass. Because your mother told you to lie. Did she not? Tessa pressed, her voice echoing in the silent room. Because your mother knew exactly what was in that glass, and she let you drink it anyway. Objection! Harlan roared, his face turning entirely red. Counsel is terrorizing the victim. Savannah did not answer the question. She just sat there, trembling, tears streaming down her face, the perfect picture of a woman trapped in a monstrous family lie. The crack in their foundation had officially split wide open. Tessa turned away from the witness stand and looked directly up at Judge Broderick. The surgical precision of her questioning had dismantled their emotional narrative, leaving only the cold, hard framework of our trap. Your Honor, Tessa said, her voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority. The defense recognizes that circumstantial evidence and contradictory testimony are insufficient to secure the safety of the child involved in this matter. Therefore, before this court issues any temporary orders regarding custody, I request immediate permission to present one final, synchronized data sequence. It will definitively prove exactly who poisoned the glass, who facilitated the act, and who orchestrated this entire fraudulent petition. The courtroom held its collective breath. I shifted my gaze toward the plaintiff's table. Wade was staring at Tessa, his mouth slightly open in complete confusion. But Lenora was not confused, for the very first time since I met her. The arrogant, wealthy matriarch looked utterly and completely terrified. Judge Broderick stared down from the bench, the heavy silence of the courtroom pressing against the wood-paneled walls. She looked at Tessa, her expression a mixture of deep skepticism and undeniable curiosity. "Proceed, Counselor Boone," the judge ordered, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "Show us this final sequence." Tessa did not hesitate. She walked over to the defense table, tapped a few keys on her laptop, and the large television monitor mounted facing the gallery flickered to life. The screen was divided into 4 distinct quadrants. "Your Honor, what you are about to see is a synchronized compilation of 4 separate data streams," Tessa explained, her voice ringing with absolute clarity. "In the top left quadrant, we have the high-definition security camera from the corner of the venue facing the outdoor bar. In the top right, we have the camera from the interior hallway looking out through the glass doors. In the bottom left, you will see a live digital clock synced perfectly to the point-of-sale logs from the bartender's register. And finally, the audio playing over the speakers was isolated from the ambient microphones set up by the event production team for the party's videographer." Tessa pressed the spacebar. The video began to play. The timestamp on the screen read 4 o'clock and 4 minutes in the afternoon. We watched in high definition as the bartender placed the frosted pink cocktail on the teakwood counter. The audio picked up the sharp clink of the glass against the wood. At exactly 4 o'clock and 5 minutes, the top left camera caught Lenora Holloway gliding into the frame. The entire courtroom collectively stopped breathing. On the screen, Wade stepped sideways, his broad shoulders filling the top right camera angle, perfectly blocking the view of the patio guests, protected by his shadow. Lenora reached into her designer clutch. The camera zoomed in slightly, the resolution so sharp you could see the light reflecting off her acrylic nails. She pulled out the small white packet, tore it open with her teeth, and dumped the white powder directly into my drink. She casually stirred it with a swizzle stick and dropped the empty packet into the trash can directly behind her. Then came the most damning moment of all. Lenora turned her head and made direct eye contact with Wade. Wade gave a single, sharp nod. Lenora smiled, a cold, calculating smirk, and walked away. Tessa paused the video right on Wade's confirming nod. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and deafening. Victor Harlan, the $2,000 an hour shark, slowly lowered himself into his leather chair, his face entirely drained of color. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his career was dangerously close to being implicated in a massive fraud. But Tessa was not finished. She projected a new document onto the screen. It was an invoice from Marcus Vance, the private investigator Wade had hired. This invoice was paid in full by Wade Holloway from his corporate account exactly 3 days before the party, Tessa stated. Turning to face the judge, "I draw the court's attention to the specific line item description written by the investigator himself. It reads, quote, 'Capture incident for custody leverage,' unquote. They knew an incident was going to happen because they engineered it. They poisoned their own family member to create a theatrical medical emergency, intending to frame my client and steal her child." A choked, hysterical sob shattered the quiet room. Everyone turned to the witness stand. Savannah Holloway was gripping the wooden rail, her knuckles completely white, tears streaming down her pale face in thick, dark tracks of ruined makeup. The crushing weight of the visual evidence completely broke whatever remaining loyalty she had to her mother. "She made me do it," Savannah wailed, her voice echoing frantically. She pointed a trembling finger directly at Lenora. "She came into my hospital room while I was still attached to the intravenous drip. She shoved a phone in my face and told me to start crying for the internet. She told me exactly what to say. She said I had to tell everyone that Morgan smiled when I fell. She said if I did not do the live stream, she would cut off my trust fund allowance permanently and ruin my life." "Shut up, Savannah!" Lenora shrieked, leaping out of her chair at the plaintiff's table. The wealthy, composed matriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. "You stupid, ungrateful girl, you are confused. Your Honor, she is heavily medicated. That video is entirely out of context. I was putting artificial sweetener in the drink." Lenora's frantic lie completely contradicted her sworn testimony from 20 minutes prior, where she had vehemently denied going anywhere near the bar. Wade, realizing the ship was sinking rapidly and taking him down with it, panicked. His self-preservation instinct overrode any remaining familial loyalty. He jumped up, waving his hands wildly. "I did not know about the poison," Wade yelled, his voice cracking in sheer terror. "I swear to God, Your Honor, I knew my mother wanted to provoke Morgan into a screaming match so the investigator could film it. I knew about the custody plan. I agreed to the custody plan, but I did not know she brought chemicals. That was all her doing." With that single, cowardly outburst, Wade had just confessed in open court to a premeditated conspiracy to manipulate a family law proceeding. Bang, bang, bang. Judge Broderick slammed her heavy wooden gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot. Her face was a mask of absolute, unyielding fury. "Order!" the judge roared, her voice silencing the chaos instantly. "Nobody move another muscle." The judge glared down at the plaintiff's table, her eyes filled with profound disgust. "In all my years on the bench, I have never witnessed such a repulsive, calculated abuse of the judicial system. You came into my courtroom, you placed your hands on a Bible, and you committed blatant, undeniable perjury. You intentionally manipulated the record, you weaponized the media, and you attempted to use the protective custody laws of this state as a tool for a malicious personal vendetta." Judge Broderick picked up Wade's emergency petition and physically tore it in half, letting the papers fall onto her desk. "The petitioner's request for ex parte emergency custody is denied with extreme prejudice," the judge declared, her tone lethal. "Furthermore, this court officially notes severe, documented evidence of fraud upon the court, perjury, and child endangerment. Counselor Boone, I assume you made the necessary phone calls this morning?" "I did, Your Honor." Tessa replied calmly. "They are waiting in the hallway." "Bring them in," the judge commanded. Tessa gestured to the bailiff standing near the heavy wooden doors. The bailiff opened them, and 3 plainclothes detectives walked straight down the center aisle of the courtroom. They did not hesitate. They bypassed the gallery and marched directly to the plaintiff's table. One detective pulled Wade's hands behind his back, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing sharply. Another detective grabbed Lenora by her expensive silk sleeves, reading her Miranda rights as she began to sob hysterically, begging Victor Harlan to do something. Harlan simply looked away, packing his briefcase with remarkable speed. "Morgan Rogers," Judge Broderick said, her voice softening slightly as she addressed me for the first time. "The court grants you immediate, temporary, primary physical and legal custody of your daughter. I am also issuing an emergency protective order against Wade and Lenora Holloway. You are granted full access to your primary residence to retrieve your personal belongings, and a police escort will accompany you to ensure your safety. You retain the right to pursue any and all civil remedies regarding the devastating financial and emotional damage inflicted upon you." "Thank you, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady and quiet. I did not cheer. I did not taunt Wade as the detectives marched him out of the courtroom. I did not offer Lenora a parting insult as she wailed in humiliation. True power does not require a loud performance. Tessa and I gathered our files and walked out of the courthouse. The press was still waiting outside, but Tessa handled them smoothly, handing out a brief, devastating press release summarizing the perjury and the arrests. I got into the back of the town car, pulled out my phone, and dialed David, the chief executive officer of Blue Mesa Care Alliance. He answered on the first ring, stammering apologies, having already seen the breaking news alerts regarding Wade's arrest. I calmly informed him that my company was ready to resume the $4 million contract implementation immediately, and he eagerly agreed. Then, I told the driver to head to my sister's house in the country. 2 hours later, I walked into a quiet, sunlit living room. Poppy was sitting on the floor, coloring a picture of a brightly colored butterfly. She looked up, dropped her crayons, and ran into my arms. I held my daughter tightly, burying my face in her dark hair, breathing in the scent of strawberries and pure, untainted innocence. She had no idea about the war that had just been fought and won for her. She only knew that her mother was there. That was the ultimate victory. I did not just survive their trap. I dismantled their entire empire, preserved my daughter's peace, and permanently etched the undeniable truth into the public record. They had called me a leech, now. They were the ones who had absolutely nothing left to drain. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please drop a comment below and let me know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel. Like this video and support the channel even more by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people.